Well, hello there. This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby. And I am your host, Liv, here with a very special episode. As we get deeper into December and I play a little more fast and loose with the structure of my episodes. That's a good example of it today. Today, I am back with the wonderful Alexandra Sills, who joined me back in October for an episode on Gladiators in the Greek world and how deeply fun and weird and kind of nerdy they were in the grand scheme of Gladiators. And when we recorded that episode, we also recorded a little something more, an episode diving into the portrayal of gladiators on screen. Yes, I focused basically all of my knowledge on the Starz Spartacus series, as I both love it and have seen the gladiator-focused episodes of that series many times by this point. Thanks to Jen and Jenny of Ancient History Fangirl. Shout out. But Alexandra, well, she actually studies gladiators, so she talks about other famous on-screen fights to the death, like the very obvious Gladiator, and the new one that's being made now, which features a ridiculously white actor playing an ancient real guy who was from North Africa and Syria. Good times. Hollywood has come so far. The sarcasm is coming across here, right? Anyway, aside from that absurdly whitewashed bit of casting, we talked about just how gladiators are portrayed on screen versus what we know about the very real people who competed in these competitions, people who did it because they were enslaved and forced to, or because they'd gained their freedom and they still wanted to fight, or because they just felt like it in the first place. Plus, while we talk a lot about the fun side of gladiators on screen, and by that I do mean ridiculously cut and attractive men, primarily Australians, honestly, and how nice they look fictionally tearing apart another nearly naked man in the arena. Let's be honest, it's such a Roman topic that is what I focus my attention on. I won't pretend to be better than that. But before we get into talking seriously about gladiator portrayal and very not seriously about hot, half-naked dudes on screen, just a reminder that you have just a little longer to submit your questions, requests, comments, literally whatever, for the New Year Q&A episode. Head to mythsbaby.com/questions and submit before December 27th. And I will do my best to get to everyone's submissions. And thank you to everyone who has already submitted. I have some great things to work off of. I love when I get particular ones where I'm like, thrilled somebody asked that. Cannot wait to answer. So send me more of those, won't you? This is episode 242, Half-Naked Dudes and Lots of Blood, Gladiators on Screen with Alexandra Sills. To the listeners, we Alexandra and I had planned to talk about these gladiators, and then at one point I just sent a frantic DM being like, what do you know about Starz Spartacus? Could we talk about it? And yeah, you were keen, and so thank you, because I'm just so fascinated by Starz Spartacus, but also we're going to turn it into more of gladiators generally on screen, because I think that's super interesting. Yeah. And I've seen Gladiator, but it's been a while. But I really have seen Starz Spartacus seasons 1 and 2 a lot. So I'd love to know. I mean, we talked a little about how they have shields, which is accurate, which is huge.
Yes, the shields.
But, yeah. So yeah, I want to know what they do right, what they do wrong. What does Gladiator do really wrong? Because I imagine there's a lot more wrong in Gladiator, and then got any and everything.
Okay, so Starz Spartacus, when it first came out, this was before I started researching the spectacle, and I kind of wrote it off as a 300 knockoff. I mean, it looked like it was trying to be 300, which already had that kind of fascist aesthetic thing going on, and I thought, But you know what? I started watching it again, because now that I research spectacle, I watch everything that's got spectacle in it. For instance, did you know that there's an episode of The Smurfs that has a gladiator episode? Yeah.
Now I know. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's Brainy Smurf as well. It's not even one of... So, I watch all of these. Sometimes it's like forcing myself to watch these. So I thought, I'll watch the Starz Spartacus series again. Yeah. And obviously, I'm not going to be happy with all of it, but I am obviously aware that it's entertainment. So, to be honest, I could talk for half an hour about the opening scene.
Okay, so I want to so here's my problem with how I went about it, and we can blame, like, I only know of Spartacus through Jen and Jenny because they're really big on Rome in the way that I'm just like obsessed with Greece. And so the silly origin that I just think says a lot about both my friendship with those ladies in Ancient History Fangirl, but also like Spartacus generally, is that we talked one time, but ended up, it was like in the height of the pandemic when everyone's like kind of locked down, and we got really drunk over FaceTime and became friends. And then they immediately transitioned into, we want you to watch Starz Spartacus with us. But what they wanted to do was go chronologically. So to the listeners, like,
oh yeah,
so they start like the first season of Spartacus. It introduces Spartacus and all of these, characters and everything. But then during the second season, the actor who was playing Spartacus was diagnosed with cancer. It's really sad. And so they created a prequel series instead to like replace it. So what we did was watch the prequel series first, which introduces Gannicus, but also is ridiculously violent, like a little bit more so than Spartacus, or like more of like it's joyful in the violence because and so like the very first episode of that, I know it ends with the guy getting peed on after he gets beaten to a pulp.
Yeah,
but I forget like how the actual I guess the first episode of Spartacus starts with like more of the Spartacus of it all and like how he gets to be enslaved. So I'm just trying to remember because I always watch it Gannicus first. That was a long-winded introduction, but essentially my basis for the show. But all to say, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Tell me everything. I don't even know. I'm just rambling now.
Okay, so I think what's really interesting with any time you tell Spartacus is that the elephant in the room is Stanley Kubrick and the 1960s
which I've never
Spartacus.
seen the original, I have to say.
I mean, I have, and there's actually not a lot of gladiatorial stuff in it. I think there's only 2 gladiatorial fights in the whole thing.
Right. Probably it's more about the rebellion itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's really difficult because that film was so iconic. It's really difficult to retell the story without calling back to that version. So, for instance, the first time we see Spartacus is he's in chains, and the first time we see 1960 Kirk Douglas, he's in chains. So this time you see him, he's chained up, and eventually you work out he's chained up underneath Capua Amphitheatre, and he's about to go and fight. And what I think is really interesting here, I mean, the nerdy thing that I thought is that amphitheatre shouldn't be there, mate. It's not been built yet.
Details.
I'm such a nerd. But the Capua Amphitheatre was built by Augustus and then rebuilt 100, 200 years later. So the actual Spartacus died 1 year before the first stone amphitheatre was built in Pompeii.
Interesting.
So if you see any version of Spartacus in a stone amphitheatre, it's wrong. So, I mean, I noted that as being pedantic. But what I thought was really interesting was the level of detail that Starz Spartacus go into, whereas other gladiatorial screen stories don't. So whereas I first kind of wrote it off as this hyper glorification of violence, soft pornography, the level of detail that they cram in there is really, really commendable.
Even just like the show generally, like I do think it comes off like that, like it really wants to be 300, and it would have given me
Yeah.
real red flags too if it wasn't introduced to me the way it was, which was like two feminists yelling about how it's good. But like, yeah, because it really gives that off. But it not only is it like the detail that I can't wait to hear about, but also like it's quite kind to women. Like the women characters are badass and also like violent and dark and like, I don't know. Yeah, I do think that it's a much better quality show in a lot of ways than I think people give it credit for if they haven't, like actually kind of sat down and watched it all.
Yeah, I think it suffers from trying to do too many things at once. So, for instance, the dialogue is all quite elevated dialogue, but the porn is very pornographic.
Yeah.
The details are there, but then they're trying really hard to attract the 300 bros. And I think they haven't managed to... Personally, they've done a great job, I think, but for me, it's a little bit disjointed. But what they really have done, which I thought was brilliant, is I've looked at Gladiators on screen from all genres. So, for instance, famous characters who have acted as gladiators on screen include, but are not limited to, Captain Kirk, Doctor Who, Thor and the Incredible Hulk. There is the Hunger Games, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Brainy Smurf. Homer Simpson, Archer, Fry and Dr. Zoidberg from Futurama. They're all of these gladiators. Game of Thrones, Dungeons and Dragons, the new film that has an arena scene. It's interesting that Starz Spartacus is the only one of, I think, 26 of these examples, including science fiction, fantasy, all of these, the only ones to include queer relationships. Gladiators in queer relationships. Too. And yeah, I mean, in the first series, there's a little bit of, bury your gays happening, but particularly in the prequel series, and then it's not quite as... Well, it is a little bit bury your gays in the prequel series. But then when you get into the later series, there's some really beautiful queer relationships between these men. And out of all of these, progressive shows, Starz, which is tits and swords, is the only one to show a really beautiful queer relationship. And that I think they really do need a round of applause for.
Yeah. No, it's really true. And like, I was thinking about the bury your gays aspect because like it's there definitely, and I don't want to like, try to defend anything, but at the same time, like I feel like it's not, I don't know, I feel like maybe it's not as egregious as like it definitely could have been, more so because it is still in service to one of the characters, like it's in service to the plot and to the romance or of like I'm thinking of Barca and like yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it's like there, but also like, I don't know, makes sense, and then also like leads him to having other relationships which are also valuable. Does that like yeah, it's difficult to explain fully, but yeah. I hadn't thought about it that way though, and it is huge to be in a show like that. Like 300, it's like 300 is like the straightest thing ever, even though it's about the Spartans. Whereas I mean,
there's a reason a certain type of guy likes that film, right? I mean,
yeah, and I do think that Spartacus almost was like, they were kind of almost like, we don't want that type, that we're not looking for the 300 audience, and we're going to make that very clear, because not only is there queer relationships, but they're like really lovely, like
beautiful relationships.
Yeah, they're really well done and really believable, and
men showing emotions. God forbid.
in a setting like Gladiators. So there's so much there.
I mean, even some of the minor characters in the Starz Spartacus series show a wider range of emotions than Russell Crowe does in Gladiator. And I know that,
Yeah.
I mean, he was amazing in that film and he deserves the Oscar, but he didn't exactly run the gamut of emotions in that film.
The male friendships, too. Like, the
Yeah.
friendships in there. Yeah. Both romantic and not. And
because there's a thing that I've noticed in gladiatorial stories is that the protagonist needs two types of friends. The one that's kind of obedient sidekick, and sometimes this is the same person, sometimes it's a separate person, and then there's the other guy who dies a violent death to show that they're in a dangerous situation, but so that the protagonist can live. And a lot of gladiatorial stories on screen, it is very much fridging. You know, they're there to die in a horrendous way so that you can think, oh, phew, my guy didn't die. But I think in Spartacus, they really do have a lot deeper characterization to the supporting cast than Gladiator, and even, I'd say, even the Hunger Games. Really, the films, the books, maybe not, but the films of the Hunger Games, some of the characters there, the supporting characters, they're not as deep as in this Starz Spartacus series, which is, you know, tits and swords.
And so many of both. Also, the male nudity, they do not shy away from, like there's an enormous amount of that show that I think is pretty strongly through, like, female gaze. Like,
yeah.
Or queer, or, like, just, it's very not straight man.
Yeah. I think you're right there. And of course, this goes back to, though, gladiators in ancient Rome were huge heartthrobs. There's a piece of graffiti in Pompeii, and it might have been written by the guy himself to, you know, like, big himself up. It might have been written by a fan, but he puts I'm the one who makes all the girls sigh. And then there's a story about a wife who's run away with a gladiator, even though he's got, you know, cauliflower ears and a broken nose and scars all over his face and things like that. I'm saying, why would she run away with him? And I'm thinking, seriously?
Yeah.
I mean, Gladiator for me came out when I was 15, and it's a very important age for a girl. And, you know, not Russell Crowe, though. It's always been Hagen for me. Big old German blonde guys. I don't know what that says about me.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, sorry, I don't know if Gladiator. I'm just trying to remember what's in it. It came out it came out in 2001, right?
2000, yeah. 2000.
Okay, yeah, so I was 12. Yeah, I feel like I was just, like, little younger. I remember watching it, though, in, like, what was basically like an art history kind of class, but it was supposed to also kind of be ancient civilizations, and our teacher had yeah. Then I would have been like 16, so
So this is where I think Spartacus is better than Gladiator. And a couple of them are, like, you know, minute details that only someone as nerdy as me would care about. So, that's, for instance, helmets. Spartacus uses helmets because they had helmets on nearly all of the time. Spartacus has shields, which, again, really important piece of kit. You mustn't leave your shield behind. You can do massive amounts of damage with it, as well as defense. Take your shield. But also, it does show the nudity, which it is an important aspect because it highlights the skill that you needed as a gladiator. If you've got your six-pack showing, and most of them wouldn't have had six-pack, sorry. I'm thinking, you know, do you remember that Pompeii film with Kit Harington as Milo the Gladiator? And he's coming out looking like he's got like 0% body fat. I'm thinking, he's not going to have the energy to do a 50. Anyway, you've got this amazing body. having it on display shows how skilled you need to be with defense with your shield. Because if you're wearing a massive breastplate like Maximus is, of course you can take as much damage as you want. There's no risk there. Part of the danger of a gladiator fight is that they're so exposed behind the shield. So yes, you need your shield. In Gladiator, they're all wearing tunics all the time, and Maximus just goes through. I think there's one fight where he kills 6 people, and I counted it, something like 32 seconds. And I know they're making a point there that he's accepting the role, but he's refusing to fulfill it in the way that they want him to by providing the spectacle. But I think what's really great about Spartacus is that they show match after match that is man on man, equally matched, and they do have that level of skill. In Gladiator, you get a lot of clanging sounds. Sword on sword, clang, 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 clang. And they just hit each other's swords for however long the scene lasts, which is not exciting. And it wouldn't have worked, and the Romans wouldn't have been very impressed with it. I think in Spartacus, they go more out of their way to show some actual technique. And I don't know who was the choreographer on the series, but they've done a great job in showing that actually you've got this kit on, this is what your kit is. You can't just clang, clang, clang. It doesn't work. You've got to find ways around it. I mean, occasionally they've fallen into the trap of, oh, I'm going to do this big old move because it looks good on the screen and it was used in a video game or something, so people are going to go wild when they see it. But generally, their matches are really good.
It's more of a spectacle. Like, it feels like a spectacle. Yeah.
But what I really hate about Spartacus is the spectators. Because they are seen to be screaming and bloodthirsty. The women are so into it that they don't realise that their tits are hanging out. It's showing the spectators to be mindless, bloodthirsty morons, when actually that's not the role of spectacle. It's to think about mortality and masculinity and strength and courage and imperialism and mercy. It's not just to see someone bleed. If you want to see someone bleed, you can do that anywhere in Rome, to be honest. It's what they're going to see is the skill and the masculinity. And that's, I think, where Spartacus, the series, for me, has the best fight scenes out of all gladiatorial screens so far. Films, TV. Spartacus has got the best one.
They're and this is like my lack of knowledge, observation, but they also seem to have a pretty decent grasp on the imperialism aspect, like the way that a lot of the different gladiators come from so many different parts of Rome where they would have been enslaving people. And there's a lot of there's a lot more diversity in that. I mean, it's all enslavement, but still, because
they were coming from all corners of the empire and beyond. And you've got them all. They did live in the same place in confined spaces, and it would have been the case that, especially in towns that weren't big enough to have 2 gladiatorial familia, you would have to fight the people that you're living with. And how do you deal with that? How do you confront the fact? So one brilliant scene that Spartacus does really, really well is Varro, the guy that signs up to get his infant son some money, the Auctorati, and he's killed at a party on the whim of a 14-year-old aristocrat. That scene is perfect because he has to accept his death with dignity. That's what he's been trained to do. He is absolutely right to say that Spartacus will be punished if Spartacus doesn't kill him. It absolutely was the case that on a whim, your best friend could be the one to kill you, and you had to deal with that in the way that was expected of you, which I can't imagine. It must have been so hard. It's taken some serious brainwashing.
Mm-hmm.
But again,
Yep.
one of the things that series does so well is that all of these people were living in close confinement with each other, but that the ludus, the building that they were all living in and training in, wasn't just gladiators. That show shows the trainers, the doctors, the cleaners, the cooks. It shows that it was a huge, huge machine of different people producing these shows behind the scenes, living together and having to negotiate such this strange profession together.
Yeah.
And I think in other shows and films, they don't go into that so much. It's all, oh, well, that guy's bad because he's from this area of the empire and I like this one, and that's it.
Yeah, it seems more like surface level. Like, just what I remember of
Yeah.
Gladiator is very, it's like yes, his like kind of, you know, enslavement is the point, but it also like I don't want to say glamorizes it, but it doesn't show, like, I guess I should say what I took from Spartacus, particularly, I mean, in different ways between the first and the second season. You know, the first season shows the horror, like, of being in a situation where you are enslaved to be forced to do that. And then I think the second season shows the different side of it, which is equally interesting. You know, Gannicus is enslaved and he is forced to do these things, but then he gains his own freedom and he does get a satisfaction out of it. Like I could see Gannicus being one of the people that you talked about, you know, in our longer episode about the gladiators, is like, I could see him having an epigraph, you know, about how proud he is of what he did, whereas Spartacus wouldn't. Like, it shows the kind of two different sides that there could be, because, you know, there are some people who embrace their life and embrace what the skills that they, you know, have gained from this and like take pride in it, and then there are others who are like, I'm doing this because I have to.
Yeah, and there's a great scene with Gannicus, is his death scene, which is where he's one of the people being crucified along the Appian Way, and it's left kind of open whether he's hallucinating through, you know, being crucified and all his oxygen's disappearing, or whether he's, you know, in his final moments, he imagines himself back in the arena with thousands of people cheering his name, and that's he smiles on his way out. And I think it's brilliant in its own little way, because it kind of gives these men the pride that too often we try and take away from them with our kind of new Christianity has spread over the West, and now we're all, you know, moralistic, even if we're not particularly Christian. That kind of wouldn't hurt a fly kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
With Gannicus, he was an artist in his own way, which is an odd way to think about it to a modern perspective. But this is how you've got to think of them, is they consider themselves very skilled tradesmen. And I can absolutely see that's the kind of way that he'd want to go out. He's on a cross, but that's the way he would have wanted to go out. Thousands cheering your name.
Well, I feel like this show is very aware of what it's doing too, because like, even just as like watching it, you know, you go through kind of so many different things, because like the spectacle that they put on when people are in the arena is like incredible to watch, and you do, like, you can understand how it would have been to be watching that, you know, in the ancient world. But then at the same time, you have to see the parts of their lives that were horrific, but you also get to see the parts where they were able to make something that they could be proud of amidst a life that maybe they didn't choose. And then, but they also give you the depth of like you develop a real love-hate relationship with the, you know, with Gladiators, who like owns everybody and his whole family. Like, I think that they're very aware of making a show that's like, you're going to love these people, you're going to hate them, you're going to be really uncomfortable. Like, there's just so many different kind of things at play. And maybe I'm giving them a lot of credit, I don't know, but like, it's quite enjoyable in that way. You do kind of get to see so many different bits and pieces.
Yeah, what I really liked with Batiatus was they emphasised with him how gladiators would be considered by the people owning them.
Mm.
So you see him care for them, not necessarily out of human compassion, because that's not his way, but because they are investments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the, and thankfully it's becoming less of a prevalent myth now, the myth that was running rampant, that gladiatorial fights always were fought to the death, which we know isn't true. You probably had anywhere between a 1 in 5 and a 1 in 10 chance each time you went out of leaving dead.
That's quite low, I would, based on what I've learned through the myth of it being to the death.
I think the beginners, obviously your chances were higher, but the better you became and the more famous you became and the more experienced you became, you began to be a draw yourself. You know, your name in lights. So it was worth keeping you alive so that you could keep making your boss money. And I think Spartacus, that series really does show that he is viewing them, and again, not because he's a humanitarian, but, you know, through a financial lens. He's thinking, how can I get these guys to make money? I need to look after them in a certain way to make sure they're fighting fit. And this is why you've got scenes with the doctors and the medical teams. We know that Gladiators did have the best medical care. A lot of money was spent on the medical care. They were given a specific diet to keep them fighting fit. Not a particularly rich diet, shall we say, but it gave them exactly the amount of fuel that they needed to do the training. And what I really like about the series is that it shows how much of a commodity a gladiator could be through Batiatus, the way that he talks about them financially, the way that he talks about buying them, selling them. Is it worth doing this with this one? How long should I keep this one alive for? And that, I think it hits home with him. I'm keeping this one alive because he keeps Spartacus alive longer than some of his friends want him to, because he knows that it's going to be a good show, and a good show earns him money. So it does demonstrate perfectly why you don't kill your gladiators 50% of the time. You need them to rise up those ranks and become superstars. And by doing that, you need to keep them well trained, which they do. You can see he's got a trainer. They even train well, like they do in the artistic depictions that we have. They would train by hitting a big it sounds so silly. A big stick.
I mean,
like,
you know,
a tree trunk.
Yeah.
And you would try attacking it. We know that. We've got it in art. So they've got that right. So I think more than any other series, Gladiator, it goes into it a little bit with Proximo, but Spartacus really does go well into the territory of it's a business enterprise, which I think gets lost in some other translations that would see it more as just, you know, a bloodbath. Capitalism, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so much more interesting to see those aspects too, because otherwise, I mean, yes, it's a bloodbath, but also like you just kind of get stuck on, you know, turning, like heroizing the main character, like in Gladiator. Like it just becomes a bit more I don't know, like I think it's more interesting to examine, well, I mean, surprise, surprise, I think it's more interesting to examine the like ancient world of it all the different aspects that went into something like Gladiators, all the bits and pieces, the very real life, you know,
Yeah.
of everyone involved. It's so much more interesting to look at that stuff and see how everything would work together and where things would clash and just to kind of see all sides of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because Batiatus and his rival, it always comes down to money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly how it was. So, for instance,
Yeah.
the person owning the gladiators, in this case Batiatus, would rent them out to the person putting on the show. And that would be at a fixed rate, depending on what type of gladiator, what rank they were. So the more experienced superstar ones could charge a hell of a lot more than the beginners.
Mm-hmm.
And if they left the arena alive, that was their fee. If they died, the person renting that gladiator not only lost what we would consider the deposit, he would have to pay the owner, in this case Batiatus, the full worth of that gladiator as compensation. So he's essentially buying the whole gladiator if they die. So when you see scenes of gladiators like Maximus or Spartacus just plough through 10 opponents in seconds, it all starts to become so expensive to become too expensive to be real.
Yeah.
Because no one would want to spend the money buying 6, 8, 10 gladiators to die in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Just because some upstart has a point to prove. That's the kind of thing that gets you whipped back at the ludus, if not immediately executed. It all comes down to money.
What a surprise.
Shocker.
The world is so different now.
So, yeah, I mean, it goes to show as well the more famous Spartacus becomes, you see that his life in the ludus becomes a little bit richer. He gets a little bit of a nicer place to sleep, gets treated nicer by the staff. It's all entirely plausible that you'd want to keep your celebrities happy, and part of that meant I mean, it didn't work, did it? Because Spartacus, as we know, wasn't very happy, famously.
I was gonna say, famously unhappy with his lot, but
and this is one thing that Spartacus does very well, and it links straight back to Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus, because the Starz series shows him in the very first episode as being more militarily talented than the Roman. The Roman ignores his advice. It all goes horribly wrong, blah, 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 blah. Spartacus is enslaved. This is important because in the 1960 version, the novel that it was based on and the screenplay were both written by prominent American communists. And they were following in a long tradition of making Spartacus some kind of communist messianic figure, right? And the studio executives, and to a certain extent Stanley Kubrick himself, went, we can't do this because we're going to get in trouble with the authorities. They're going to whop us in prison. So slowly but surely, over the course of that film being made, every reference to Spartacus being a credible threat to the Roman Empire was taken out. So the real Spartacus fought in, I think, 9 battles, and they don't show a single one in that film apart from the one where he fails. So none of his victories are shown. The screenwriter had to fight with the studio executives to have them mention any of the victories. So that film, because they were so scared of presenting a communist hero, essentially emasculated him completely into someone who you think, well, yeah, he's not a credible threat. you never see him doing anything threatening. But the Starz series shows all of these battles. They show you that he has got this tactical mind, that he can organise a battle, that he is a man of the people. I don't think it would be fair to call the ancient Spartacus a communist or an abolitionist of slavery. There's no evidence that he wanted any of that. I think the evidence is that he wanted to escape. If he could take a lot of people with him, that's great, because there's strength in numbers, but it's not because he wanted to destroy the institution of slavery. There's just no evidence for that. Yeah. So he was not a revolutionary. He just understood that he was more likely to escape if he had a lot of people backing him up. Mm-hmm. But I think that one thing that is important that the Starz Spartacus series has done is to return him as a credible military threat, because he was, he really was a credible threat. And the 1960s, they were too scared to show it.
Yeah. I didn't know any of that because I haven't seen that one. Yeah, that's so 1960s and also so American broadly, like.
Oh yeah.
But especially American in that time. But I mean, the way America is still just so entirely afraid of the very concept of communism is hilarious. But yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, I will give them props for that. They show the battles, they show you him winning, and obviously they've got a series rather than a film, so they've got more time to show it. But it's not like Stanley Kubrick didn't have the budget. There's a reason that he didn't put Spartacus winning any battles in the movie.
Yeah.
But here, they show him, and he really, really frightens the Romans, and he did. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I really love that. I just wish that they hadn't had to change actors. But
yeah,
it's not the same. That's really interesting. I'm really glad to know that. And I also, though, realize we've already gone over our little planned time, but I would love to still hear a bit more about what your thoughts are on the new Gladiator and potential new Spartacus, if you've got another 10 minutes.
So Ridley Scott, for reasons unknown to anyone but himself,
yep,
has decided to do a sequel 24, well, it will be 24 years later, which has prompted Starz to talk about rebooting their series. And there's also a third gladiatorial series on its way, which is Roland Emmerich is making a series called Those About to Die, which there is not a lot of info about. So cautiously optimistic about that one. The issues that I have with Gladiator 2 are, for a start, they're whitewashing the cast.
That's what I was going to say. That's the only thing I know is that, which is the most, okay, so there's only one that I heard of because I think it was so egregious. Like the person was from, like the real person was like Carthaginian or something, and they have like the whitest actor.
So yeah, they've got Caracalla, and his father was from Leptis Magna, which is in northern Africa, and his mother was Syrian. And they've got him being played by... Oh, I think it was going to be that guy, the Irish guy.
Stranger Things, right? Oh, no. There's one.
Oh, no, yeah, it's the guy from Stranger Things. And then his brother is equally, even paler, if that's possible. The reason that I've got an issue for this is that, like 300, the movie Gladiator has its own special little fan club of people with certain ideological views. And there's already a problem with whitewashing antiquity to fit in with this idea of the West being the inheritors of this pure civilization. And if you start whitewashing the crap out of a dynasty that were very much not white, I think it's just giving ammunition to the wrong people who have, let's face it, got enough ammunition as it is.
Yeah, the idea that we're still doing that in 2023, that's the most horrifying thing, because you're right, like the ancient world, particularly Greece and Rome, already have an enormous amount of white supremacy tied to them by white supremacists, but also by these like long-standing ideas of whiteness that have been put on them. So yeah, like taking a character that's got North African and Syrian roots and making them so white, you know.
I mean, milk pale.
Like, just like the palest person imaginable. Yeah.
And I
like
mean, they're filming in Malta. I don't know how much SPF they're going through with that cast.
Yeah. I mean, they're it's wild. I learned about that casting and I was like, oh, the guy from Stranger Things, cool. And then I saw somebody tweet about, because I didn't know where Caracalla was from, but then they were like, yeah, Syrian and North African. I was like,
oh yeah, that might have been me tweeting. Actually, I've been very vocal about it.
It was. I feel like it was either you or like, I mean, I'm on a very leftist classics part of Twitter. Thank fuck.
Yeah,
there's a reason I'm there.
It's where the cool kids are.
Yeah, damn right. I got threatened with communism the other day, and I was like, please, like,
yes, please
don't threaten me with a good time. Like, truly. But yeah, it's I mean, it's horrifying that is still happening
as well. The thing is, gladiatorial stories, and this goes for Swords and Sandals as well as other genres that it's bled out into, has a real problem with how they talk about race. Starz Spartacus less so, but it's not perfect.
No.
In that a lot of the characters of colour amongst the gladiatorial ludus are what we would call the black buddy sidekick, or sometimes referred to as the magical Negro. Claire Greenhouse has done a great chapter on this. She's listed all of them and how they all fit into the same tired tropes that again go back to the 1960 film, where it's released in 1960. So you've got this the black gladiator Drabba, who decides it's better to die than to live enslaved, which might have been a really strong message in 1960, but here we are all of these years later, and you've still got the black gladiators being sacrificed left, right and centre and being treated like subservient to their white buddy. What frustrates me with Gladiator 2 is that they are bringing back Juba. He is recurring. Now, he is the only member of Maximus's Ludus to survive the first film. All of the rest of them sacrifice themselves to give Maximus enough time to get away. Juba is the only person that manages to escape, and he says at the end, and now we are free. I will see you in this life and not what the next. And you think, well, who's we? There's none of you left, right?
Yeah.
You're all dead. But more than that, he is the one that talks to Maximus about the importance of family, homeland. He is the one that buries Maximus's little figurines of his wife and son, talks about meeting them in the afterlife. And you see Juba at the end of the last film. He is the character that is the hope for the audience stand-in, because he's the only person who's not an aristocrat who survives the film.
Right.
And you get the idea that now he is free. So he's going to go back to Africa and find his family and his children, his wife that he's spoken about. But then they're bringing the actor back for the sequel. So what does that say? It says that he hasn't managed to achieve freedom. He hasn't got back to his homeland. He hasn't reunited with his family, and he's still crushed under the Roman wheel. So that's really fucking depressing. Sorry. I mean, I love the actor. I think he's brilliant, but that is pissing in my cornflakes.
Yeah, I wish I remembered Gladiator now, because I don't even remember most of the plot. I think the last time I saw it. But yeah, also just generally, I'm curious how they're going to handle the whole plot, given everything you just said. You know, even aside from the ramifications of bringing back a character like that, like, it just, I don't know, it doesn't seem like a movie that was at all in need of a sequel, let alone one 24 years later.
I mean, the thing is if you're going the historical route, which I highly doubt, because I don't think Ridley Scott's ever read a book about ancient Rome.
You mean Maximus wasn't a real person?
No. Could you believe it?
Go around naming everybody Maximus?
So Lucius isn't supposed to have survived, neither is his mum, who is also coming back. Lucius did have a surviving brother who was murdered by Caracalla, I think, or one of the Severins, murdered him. So either they're going to kill off Paul Mescal, or, I don't know, maybe they'll have him be the one that kills Caracalla, because Caracalla was assassinated in a very exciting way. He was having a wee at the side of the road and got stabbed whilst he was pissing. So I highly doubt Ridley Scott's going to put that in. So either they're going to have a film called Gladiator 2, which has hardly got any gladiators in it. I don't know. It's going to be a fucking mess. Yeah. Such a mess.
Well, that's the thing. If you base your entire movie on freeing gladiators and then you make a second one called Gladiator 2, like, what is the point? What are you doing here?
I mean, they've got bigger problems, because, they've got to somehow explain that Maximus died so that they could bring the Republic back. And now they've got to admit, oh, he didn't bring the Republic back. It's still emperors. Oopsie. Your hero died for nothing. Oops. So that's embarrassing. I've got no idea why. The film, I love that film. Not as a fascist. I have other reasons for liking the film.
I don't know that you had to say that, but I appreciate that you did.
I do. I really do.
I just want to say, I would have assumed, and I would hope that if you're on my show, you're just not a fascist, you know?
I'm very much not a fascist, but a lot of fascists like the film. So, yeah, unfortunately, it is getting to the point where you've got to kind of clarify.
It sounds like 300. Only.
Yeah,
might be
exactly. Yeah, I don't think it needed a sequel. I highly intend to get some journal articles, maybe a conference paper or two out of it, so great.
Yeah, benefit.
The Starz Spartacus series is also going to be difficult to reboot, simply because, yes, there were survivors. We did see a hell of a lot of them be crucified along the Appian Way. That's accurate. However, the ones that escaped over the mountains were all hunted down over the next year by Pompey and also crucified and murdered in their thousands. So again, really fucking depressing.
That'll be a great show.
It would literally be 10 episodes of people living in the woods, having to wipe their arse with leaves and get hunted down by Romans. There's no happy ending. Slavery wasn't stopped. Gladiatorial combat wasn't stopped. Aristocracy crunching people under their heels, that didn't stop. I don't know, you could do another prequel maybe, but I think the really important thing to note with the Spartacus story, and they do follow history quite closely, there was never a single gladiator uprising after that. Either people were too oppressed to do it, or they were too, as we've seen, it was perfectly possible to be content as a gladiator with your fate. So there wasn't another uprising. So if you're going to do another series, it's either going to be about people being massacred or maybe they could do a series where Spartacus's ghost goes to Greece, where there's loads of cool gladiators who aren't miserable all the time. You know. That
would be fun.
You could get me as the historical consultant on that one. I work for, really cheap. So cheap. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to any of it, simply because I mean, I don't understand. They're going to have to dig themselves out of so many holes for both ones. So my money is on those who are about to die. Because, well, simply because I don't know anything, so I can't get depressed about it yet.
Cautiously optimistic so far.
I think the important thing is there have been gladiators on screen since we've had screens. And if anything, after Kubrick and after Ridley Scott, it's shown acceleration. So you've got them in science fiction, fantasy, dystopian, comedy, parody, Smurfs. You've got them in
I'm never not going to find that hilarious.
I know. I can't believe it myself.
No.
And I think the recent Dungeons and Dragons movie, which had a fantastic arena sequence, I think if that...
Such a fun movie.
Oh, it's a brilliant movie.
Really underrated. I feel like I didn't hear anybody talk about it. It's very good.
I mean, I could talk about that movie for hours, just about that one scene. That scene shows that with imagination and modern CGI, you can make arena scenes ever more bombastic. So I don't think gladiators are going to leave our screens anytime soon. Away from swords and sandals, they're still going to be there often. I mean, we've seen them in Game of Thrones. We've seen them everywhere. They are everywhere.
Was pretty.
Oh great. Yeah,
the Thor. Oh my god. Yeah,
Korg. Korg is brilliant.
I mean,
what a character.
Honestly, truly.
And you know what I really loved about that is that this is gonna sound so nerdy. The Hulk had his helmet on. It's the detail, people. It's the detail.
I mean, that movie is one of the best Marvel movies ever. That's a fact.
I'm not a huge Marvel fan. I watched it because I knew it had a gladiatorial scene in it, because I did a paper that's coming out soon, actually, about gladiators in Hollywood. It's coming out in Melita Classica, Volume 9. And, I go through all of these shows and talk about what they've got in common. And that's the only reason I watched that film. So I had to get my friends to explain, why is Thor doing that? Who's this guy?
The best part about that movie, though, is I feel like it's such a departure from most of the Marvel that came before it, which is why I like it so much, but also would be probably easier to be kind of thrown in because it's really absurd compared to most others, including the other Thor movies. It doesn't really fit in a great way.
Yeah, I feel like it has a similar sense of humour to the Dungeons and Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
And I really hope that turns into a franchise.
Oh my god, me too. No, it was wonderful. Yeah. But when it comes to the Thor, it was just so Taika Waititi. That was the key to it, right? It was the first one he did, and then of course he plays Korg, and it's key. Just that's what it is. It's
that's why
hilarious and wonderful, and yeah.
And I mean, going back to the Greek gladiators, I think if anyone takes them to the screen, it needs to be Taika Waititi.
Oh my god, could you imagine? It could be what's his amazing pirate show, but
oh yeah, Our Flag Means Death. Yeah, you can have your really overly serious movies with Maximus in the West, but we'll have Taika in the East.
Yes, making Our Flag Means Death, but with gladiators, it could be so queer and silly and fun, but with Greek gladiators.
I've got casts, ideal casts already running through my head. And again, I would work so cheaply as a historical consultant. I'm just saying, I would work for cookies if necessary. Just give me a call.
I'm also going to correct in case somebody wants to yell at me. I know that he isn't making Our Flag Means Death. He's in it. I know it has different creators, but it has the same vibes. Okay.
I just know that I enjoyed it. I thought that was fabulous.
I mean, there's a reason he's in it, because it has some very similar vibes to him. In any case, yeah, that's a new goal. I just want more than anything, and this comes up on the show all the fucking time, I just want a movie about the ancient world that is accurate in its absurdity, because there is so much wonderfully magnificent absurdity to work with in the ancient world, and instead every time Hollywood picks it up, they either make it like overly serious to the point of unrealistic, or they like Clash of the Titans it, where they're like, it's mythological and weird, but none of it's accurate, even though everything Perseus actually does could make for an incredible movie with all of the same action and fun and silliness, without making like a fucking herd of Pegasi, or like having Pegasus go fly him to Medusa. Like I just want some accuracy.
Do you know, there is one inaccuracy though, and all of the Gladiator shows have it, and I will never ever complain about it, is braces. The men always wear the braces on their wrists, and I will never ever complain, because I have a theory, right, that braces on men is like corsets and lingerie on women.
I can see this, yeah.
In that they are designed completely purposeless, apart from to highlight a particular body part that looks particularly good on that gender, right? That's their sole function. Braces are like corsets for men. Because you think about all the films, Brad Pitt in Troy and Eric Bana in Troy, they've got the braces.
Oh, I can see them. Yeah. Like
I think Cavill wears braces when he was Theseus, wasn't he?
Oh,
in the film?
But we don't talk about that.
I mean,
absolutely nothing about it actually resembles Theseus, and Theseus is still garbage.
It's Henry Cavill, so I'll give it a pass. But yeah,
for sure.
You think
I'm sure he wears them in Witcher, and they look great. So
yes, James Purefoy in Rome wears braces better than any man I've ever seen. So I don't care how many gladiators wear them. Gladiators didn't have them, but
but they look hot.
You can stick them on whomever you like, and it will make them look hotter. It's magic. It is magic.
Magnificent.
Just put them on everyone.
That isn't the perfect way to wrap it up. I don't know what is. The bracers are hot, even if they're inaccurate, and we're all here for it.
Oh, my mum is going to listen to this.
I mean, I'm sure she'll just agree with you. It's fine. Thank you so much for doing this one too. This was so much fucking fun.
Oh, it was.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Do you want to tell my listeners again where to find more, or I can also just copy what you said in the last episode?
You can find me on pretty much all social media as Beloved Voices. I am currently contributing to Bad Ancient and Working Classicists. I've got a couple of articles coming out that will probably be linked somewhere on my website, which I'm sure you can provide a link to, because I can't remember what the URL is. But yeah, I'm around. I'm everywhere.
I'll link to the Bad Ancient and stuff too, because it's fun.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you.
Share those things. Yeah, any Working Classicists stuff too. I just
I mean, I am so proud to work for those two.
They're wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, nerds, thank you so much for listening. It was so fun speaking with Alexandra about this, just diving into the representations of gladiators in a fun and silly kind of way. It's fascinating the ways that the ancient world is portrayed on screen, for good and bad, even when it's Rome. Gladiators specifically hold our attention in a way that so much else from the ancient world just doesn't. Obviously, there's so much to unpack about why that is, but they remain a fascinating topic, and one where we actually have a number of really interesting examples to look at when talking about the realm of gladiators. Plus, well, it was really just fun to ramble about all I know about Starz Spartacus, because frankly, it's a lot. It's a good show. R.I.P. Andy Whitfield. All right, I'm going to end the episode on a review from one of you amazing listeners, as always. This comes from a user called PFun1 in the States. A hidden gem! So glad I found this gem of a podcast. It's become my obsession as I have recently found Greek mythology fascinating, and Liv does a great job sharing these with wit and humor. A must listen. Thank you so very much. I'm going to not comment on how Americans spell humor, but it just perpetually looks weird. Let's Talk About Myths, Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Smith is the Hermes to my Olympians. My assistant producer, Laura Smith, is now the production assistant and audio engineer. Maybe she needs a mythological name. Select music in this episode was by Luke Chaos. The podcast is part of the iHeart Podcast Network. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Help me continue bringing you the world of Greek mythology and the ancient Mediterranean by becoming a patron, where you'll get bonus episodes and more. Visit patreon.com/mythsbaby or click the link in this episode's description. Thank you all. You're the best. Man, this is fun and nerdy. What a cool job I have. I am Liv, and I love this shit.